I am Sonia, 32 years old and a United States Marshal for 8 years now. Despite the dangers, I love my job and take pride in wearing my uniform. My sister Valerie married into the wealthy Harrington family last year, and they invited me to dinner at their mansion. I never expected to discover that Valerie had been lying about my career, telling them I wash dishes for a living. Little did I know that night would change our relationship forever. If you are watching this from your couch after a long day, give this video a like and subscribe to hear how I stood up for myself when family betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Growing up, Valerie and I shared everything despite our 4-year age gap. As the older sister, I always felt protective of her, stepping in whenever kids at school would tease her for her braces, or when boys would break her heart in high school. Our parents worked multiple jobs to keep us fed and housed in our modest neighborhood just outside Portland. Dad worked construction during the day and as a security guard at night, while Mom cleaned houses and later worked as a receptionist at a dental office. They instilled in us the value of hard work and self-reliance, always telling us that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. From an early age, our personalities were complete opposites. I was the practical one, serious about school and planning for the future. I saved my allowance, worked summer jobs, and focused on getting scholarships for college. Valerie, on the other hand, was all about social connections and appearances. She had a natural charm about her that drew people in, and she cared deeply about what others thought. While I wore thrift store jeans and simple tees, Valerie would save for months to buy designer clothes or have Mom sew knockoffs that looked surprisingly authentic. Despite our differences, we remained close through high school. I helped her with homework while she helped me come out of my shell at social gatherings. We balanced each other out in ways that made our bond stronger. When I left for college to study criminal justice at Oregon State University, Valerie would call me every night for advice on everything from boys to what classes to take when she joined me in college the following year. My path to becoming a U.S. Marshal was not an easy one. After graduating with my criminal justice degree, I applied to multiple law enforcement agencies. The acceptance into the U.S. Marshal service came after 3 attempts and countless hours of preparation. The training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Georgia was the most challenging experience of my life. 17 weeks of physical training, firearms proficiency, operational skills, and legal education pushed me to my limits. I still remember the pride I felt when I received my badge and was sworn in knowing that less than 15% of applicants make it through. My first assignments involved prisoner transport and courthouse security. Over time, I earned spots on fugitive task forces tracking down some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. I have been shot at twice, stabbed once, and have had more sleepless nights than I can count. But each time we successfully apprehended someone who had hurt innocent people, I felt a deep sense of purpose. The pay was modest compared to what some of my college friends earned in corporate jobs, but I never once regretted my choice. While I was building my career in law enforcement, Valerie took a completely different path. She attended the University of Washington and quickly became known for attending the right parties and dating guys from wealthy families. She often joked that her major was really in finding a husband, though she did eventually graduate with a communications degree. She worked briefly at a public relations firm, but made it clear that her goal was to marry well and live comfortably. Valerie met Richard Harrington at a charity gala in Seattle 3 years ago. She had been invited as the +1 of a friend who worked at a high-end department store. Richard, the only son of Charles and Eleanor Harrington, was immediately taken with her beauty and charm. The Harringtons owned a real estate development company that had built half of downtown Seattle and had properties up and down the West Coast. Their wealth went back 3 generations, and they were fixtures in Seattle society. The whirlwind romance between Valerie and Richard lasted 6 months before he proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my annual salary. Their wedding was featured in Seattle Magazine with 400 guests, a reception at the Harrington estate, overlooking Puget Sound, and a honeymoon that took them to 5 countries over 3 weeks. I was a bridesmaid, of course, but I felt out of place among the wealthy guests and their conversations about vacation homes and private schools. After the wedding, the distance between Valerie and me grew. Our weekly calls became monthly, then quarterly. When we did speak, she would talk about charity committees, country club memberships, and shopping trips to New York or Paris. I shared stories about work when they were not confidential, but I could tell she was no longer interested in my world. She would change the subject or suddenly remember an appointment whenever I talked about my job. The Harrington family, particularly Charles and Eleanor, had very specific expectations for their daughter-in-law. Eleanor came from old money herself and was known for her leadership in various charitable organizations and her strict adherence to social protocols. Charles, while more self-made than his wife, had built their family business into an empire and expected a certain level of professionalism and appearance from anyone associated with the Harrington name. From the few times I had met them, I gathered that status and appearances were paramount to the Harringtons. Eleanor once commented that she had never set foot in a big box store and could not understand why anyone would shop at such places. Charles drove a car that cost more than most houses and wore watches that could pay for a college education. They lived in a world completely separate from the one I knew. Richard seemed somewhat more down-to-earth than his parents, though still very much a product of his privileged upbringing. He had worked in the family business since college and had never known financial struggle. He was polite to me during our limited interactions, but clearly uncomfortable with discussions about my work in law enforcement. I once mentioned a case involving a wealthy embezzler, and he quickly excused himself from the conversation. As the months passed after their wedding, Valerie began to adopt the mannerisms and attitudes of the Harrington family. Her voice took on a slightly different accent, her clothing became exclusively designer brands, and her conversations revolved around people whose names appeared in society pages. The sister I had grown up with seemed to be disappearing into this new identity she had created for herself. The call from Valerie came on a Tuesday morning in November, nearly 6 months since we had last spoken. I was at my desk reviewing case files when my personal phone lit up with her name. "Sonia, hi, how are you?" Her voice had that forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on alert. "Val, this is a surprise. I am good, busy with work as usual. How are things with you?" I shuffled my paperwork to the side, giving her my full attention. "Everything is wonderful. Richard just closed a huge deal in Vancouver, and we are thinking of buying a vacation property there. But listen, that is not why I called." She paused, and I could hear the nervous tension in her voice. "Charles and Eleanor are hosting a special dinner this Saturday, and they specifically asked that you come." I nearly dropped my phone. In the year and a half that Valerie had been married to Richard, his parents had never once expressed interest in spending time with me. "They want me at dinner. Why now?" I could not keep the suspicion from my voice. "Well, they are curious about you, and Richard thought it would be nice for the families to get closer. It is an important night, Sonia. Some of their closest friends will be there and a couple of Richard's business associates." The way she emphasized important made it clear this was not just a casual family gathering. "What time should I be there?" I asked already, mentally checking my schedule and wondering if I could get Saturday off. 7:30 sharp. The address is 22 Ocean View Lane in Medina. And Sonia. Her voice dropped a notch. "Could you wear something conservative, maybe that navy blue dress you wore to Cousin Lisa's wedding, and maybe not mention too much about your work, just keep it vague if anyone asks." That request raised immediate red flags, but I agreed anyway. "I will see what I can find to wear. Anything else I should know? Just be punctual. Eleanor hates tardiness more than anything. And maybe bring a bottle of wine. Something French if you can find it." She gave a nervous laugh. "Call me if you need any guidance on that." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, puzzling over the strange conversation. Valerie had never been one to hide her feelings, and it was clear she was anxious about this dinner. But why? And why the specific instructions about not discussing my work? The next few days were a flurry of preparation. First, I had to request Saturday evening off, which meant trading shifts with a colleague and promising to cover his Sunday morning court assignment. Next came the challenge of finding appropriate attire. The navy dress Valerie mentioned had long since been donated after it had been damaged at the wedding. My wardrobe consisted primarily of practical clothing, suitable for my job suits for court appearances, tactical wear for operations, and casual clothes for my limited free time. I spent my lunch break on Wednesday at a department store trying on dresses that would meet Valerie's standards without breaking my budget. I finally settled on a simple black dress with 3/4 sleeves that the saleswoman assured me would be appropriate for a formal dinner. The price made me wince, but I reminded myself this was a rare expense. Next came the wine. I knew nothing about French wines and had a modest budget, so I visited a local wine shop where the owner helped me select a bottle of Bordeaux that he promised would impress without requiring a second mortgage. When he told me the price, I silently calculated how many lunches I would need to bring from home to make up for this extravagance. In between preparations, I did some research on the Harrington family business. Their company, Harrington Development Group, had recently acquired several properties in downtown Seattle for a controversial luxury development project. There had been some protests about the displacement of affordable housing, but the project had ultimately been approved by the city council. I wanted to be informed in case business came up during dinner conversation. By Saturday afternoon, I was as prepared as I could be. My dress was pressed, the wine was chilling, and I had rehearsed several safe topics of conversation. I had just stepped out of the shower when my work phone rang. It was my supervisor, and the tone of his voice told me immediately that something was wrong. "Carson, I hate to do this to you on your day off, but we have a situation with the Reynolds witness. Defense has filed a last-minute motion claiming witness tampering, and the judge has called an emergency hearing for 6 this evening. We need you there since you were the primary on the protection detail." My heart sank. "How long do you think it will run? I have that family dinner at 7:30. Hard to say. This judge is thorough but usually efficient. Could be an hour, could be 3. You know how these things go." I did know, and that was the problem. "I will be there in 30 minutes. And I will need to wear my formal uniform since I will be heading directly to a dinner afterward. Whatever works, just get here." The emergency hearing did indeed start promptly at 6, but it quickly became clear it would not be a quick matter. The defense attorney had brought multiple affidavits and was questioning each detail of the witness protection protocols. By 7:15, we were still in the courtroom, and I was sending desperate texts to Valerie explaining the situation. "Running late. Court emergency. Will come directly when done. So sorry." Her responses grew increasingly frantic. "You cannot be late. Eleanor will take it as a personal insult. Can you please find someone to cover for you? This is so important. At least tell me you will still have time to change out of your work clothes." When the judge finally gavelled the session closed at 7:40, I had no time to go home and change. I ran to my car, still in my full U.S. Marshal dress uniform, complete with badge, nameplate, and sidearm secured in its holster. The formal uniform was impressive with its dark navy blazer, crisp white shirt tie, and matching navy pants with the gold stripe down the leg. Under any other circumstances, I would have been proud to wear it. Tonight, it felt like I was heading into battle. The drive to Medina took 25 minutes, during which Valerie called 4 times. I finally answered through my car's Bluetooth. "I am on my way, Val. I will be there in 10 minutes. You are still in your uniform, aren't you?" Her voice was tight with tension. Yes, I had no choice. It was either come like this or not come at all. "Would you prefer I turn around?" No, just come. But maybe you could leave your gun in the car." "Valerie, I am a federal officer. My sidearm stays with me. It is secured and professional." She made a sound between a sigh and a groan before hanging up. The Harrington estate was exactly as ostentatious as I had imagined. A long, winding driveway led to a mansion that looked like it belonged in a historical movie, complete with columns and perfectly manicured gardens. Several luxury cars were parked in the circular drive, their combined value probably equal to the total value of every vehicle in my apartment complex. As I walked to the imposing front door, my confidence in my uniform wavered slightly. I reminded myself that I had nothing to be ashamed of. I served my country, honorably protected the public, and had earned every thread of this uniform. With that thought firmly in mind, I rang the doorbell, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to enter a world far removed from my own. The massive oak door swung open to reveal a man in what appeared to be an actual butler's uniform. He gave me a professional once-over his expression, revealing nothing as he took in my marshal's uniform. "Good evening, ma'am. May I help you?" His tone suggested I might have arrived at the wrong address. "I am Sonia Carson. I was invited to dinner by the Harringtons. I apologize for being late." Before the butler could respond, Valerie appeared behind him, her face a mask of controlled panic. She wore a designer dress that probably cost 3 months of my salary, her hair and makeup flawless. For a brief moment, I saw her eyes widen at my uniform before she forced a smile. "Sonia, you made it." She stepped forward to air, kiss my cheek, whispering harshly, "I told you to wear the blue dress," before turning back to the butler. "James, this is my sister. Please, show her to the living room." I followed James through an entryway that was larger than my entire apartment, complete with a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a European palace. The house smelled of expensive perfume, polished wood, and something delicious cooking. Family photos lined one wall, and I noticed Valerie featured prominently in recent ones, always perfectly dressed and smiling beside Richard and his parents. The living room fell silent as I entered. 8 people turned to stare at me, drinks in hand, conversations halted mid-sentence. I recognized Richard from the wedding and an older couple I assumed were Charles and Eleanor Harrington. The other guests were strangers to me, though their expressions of surprise were universal. Eleanor recovered first, setting down her crystal wine glass and approaching with a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. She was a tall, slim woman in her early 60s, with carefully maintained blonde hair and the kind of face that suggested multiple cosmetic procedures. "You must be Valerie's sister." "How unexpected to see you in uniform." She extended a manicured hand. "I am Eleanor Harrington. We met briefly at the wedding, though I doubt you would remember. There were so many guests. Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Harrington. I apologize for my attire and tardiness. I came directly from an emergency court hearing." I shook her hand firmly, meeting her gaze directly. Charles Harrington approached next, his interest seeming more genuine. He was a distinguished-looking man with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding rooms. "A U.S. Marshal, are you? Fascinating work, I imagine." He shook my hand with a grip that suggested he was assessing my character through the firmness of my handshake. "It can be, sir, though much of it is routine, contrary to what television might suggest." Richard came forward, looking uncomfortable but making an effort. "Good to see you again, Sonia. Let me introduce you to our other guests." He led me around the room, introducing me to a judge from the state Supreme Court, a state senator and his wife, and 2 business associates whose names and titles suggested they were important in the financial world. Each reacted with varying degrees of surprise when Richard introduced me as Valerie's sister, a federal law enforcement officer. As the introductions concluded, Valerie appeared at my side with a glass of wine, pressing it into my hand with a meaningful look. "Dinner will be served in a few minutes. Perhaps you could tell Judge Whitmore about your college experience. He is an Oregon State alumni as well." I recognized her attempt to steer the conversation away from my current profession and felt a flicker of annoyance. Nevertheless, I engaged the judge in conversation about the university, carefully avoiding any mention of my criminal justice studies or subsequent career. Throughout our chat, I noticed Eleanor watching me with thinly veiled disapproval, her eyes repeatedly moving to my sidearm. When the butler announced dinner, we moved to a formal dining room dominated by a massive table that could easily seat 20. Crystal glasses, fine china, and more silverware than I knew what to do with awaited at each place setting. I noted with some dismay that I had been seated at the opposite end of the table from Valerie, between the state senator's wife and one of the business associates. The first course, a delicate soup I could not identify, was served by staff who moved silently around the table. I watched the others to determine which spoon to use and tried to appear comfortable in these surroundings. "So Marshal Carson, the senator, began, what brought you to law enforcement? It seems an unusual choice for a woman." I bit back my initial response about his outdated perspective and answered diplomatically, I have always been drawn to justice and public service, Senator. The Marshal's service offers a unique opportunity to uphold federal law while providing critical protection to the judicial process. Fascinating, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. My brother-in-law is with the FBI, says the Marshals are the real workhorses of federal law enforcement. This led to questions about the differences between various agencies, which I answered as concisely as possible while noting Valerie's increasingly anxious glances from the other end of the table. She was seated between Richard and his mother, looking beautiful but tense. As the main course was served an impressive roast with vegetables arranged like a magazine photo, the conversation shifted to recent charity events. Eleanor dominated this discussion, dropping various celebrities and politicians who had attended functions she had chaired. The governor himself told me our foundation gala was the most successful fundraiser he had attended all year, she said, directing her comment to the senator's wife. We raised over $2 million for children's cancer research. That is truly impressive, I commented sincerely. Whatever I thought of Eleanor's personality, the cause was worthwhile. She looked surprised that I had spoken, then gave a thin smile. Yes, well, those of us fortunate enough to move in certain circles have a responsibility to give back. The implication that I existed outside those circles was clear, but before I could respond, the conversation shifted to politics. The senator and Charles began discussing a recent bill related to property development regulations, and I found myself excluded from the conversation. I focused on my meal, which was admittedly delicious, and attempted small talk with the businessman beside me. He seemed more interested in his phone than conversation, checking it repeatedly under the table. It was during a lull in the general conversation that I overheard Eleanor speaking quietly to Valerie. I would not have caught it if the senator had not chosen that moment to request more wine, creating a brief silence at our end of the table. Still working that dishwashing job. Could Richard not find her something more suitable in one of our companies? Eleanor's whisper carried just far enough for me to hear. Valerie's response made my blood run cold. She is stubborn, Eleanor. I have tried to help her find something better, but she insists on keeping that job. At least it is honest work, even if it is. Well, you know. I froze my fork halfway to my mouth as the implications of what I had just heard sank in. Dishwashing job, Valerie had told her in laws that I washed dishes for a living. I was wearing a federal law enforcement uniform, had been introduced as a marshal, and somehow Eleanor was still under the impression that I scrubbed pots for a living. I set my fork down carefully, fighting to keep my expression neutral while my mind raced. Had Valerie been lying about my career all along? If so, why? What possible reason could she have to be ashamed of my service as a U.S. Marshal? I sat in stunned silence for several moments, trying to process what I had just overheard. The conversation around me continued, but the words were just noise, as I struggled to understand why my own sister would lie about my career, especially when the truth was something most people would respect. I glanced toward Valerie, who was now engaged in conversation with the judge, laughing at something he said while occasionally darting nervous glances in my direction. She had no idea I had overheard Eleanor's comment, but she clearly remained concerned about my presence in uniform. The hurt I felt was profound. This was not just a simple misunderstanding or a white lie told in passing. This was a deliberate, ongoing deception about a fundamental part of my identity, something I had worked incredibly hard to achieve. Each moment I sat there, the pain transformed into anger, a slow, burning sensation that rose from my stomach to my chest. I was considering my options when Charles Harrington addressed me directly, cutting through my thoughts. So Marshal Carson, Eleanor tells me you work in food service when you are not playing dress-up in that uniform. Is law enforcement some kind of volunteer position these days? His tone was genuinely curious rather than condescending, which made the question even more bizarre. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me, including Valerie's, which had gone wide with horror. In that moment, I made my decision. This deception ended now. I am afraid there has been a misunderstanding, Mr. Harrington, I said, my voice steady, despite my inner turmoil. I am a full-time United States Marshal, and have been for 8 years. This is not a volunteer position or a side job. It is my career. Eleanor looked confused, then turned to Valerie. but you said she worked washing dishes at a restaurant. That she was between jobs and too proud to accept help. The room became so quiet I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Valerie's face had drained of color, and Richard was looking at his wife with confusion. "Valerie," he questioned, "what is this about?" My sister opened her mouth, closed it, then finally spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I may have simplified Sonia's situation. Simplified, I could not keep the edge from my voice. You told them I wash dishes for a living when I am a federal law enforcement officer. It is not like that," Valerie protested weakly. "I just thought it would be easier if what I pressed aware of the audience but beyond caring. If your in-laws thought your sister had a less impressive job. If they believed I needed pity rather than respect." Charles Harrington looked between us, his expression shifting from confusion to something that resembled amusement. "Well, this is certainly more interesting than our usual dinner conversations." Eleanor appeared scandalized. "Valerie, I do not understand. Why would you lie about something like this?" Before Valerie could answer, I decided to take control of the situation. I stood up, straightened my uniform jacket, and addressed the table. "Since there seems to be some confusion about what I do, allow me to clarify. As a deputy U.S. Marshal, I am responsible for apprehending federal fugitives, protecting federal witnesses, transporting federal prisoners, and providing security for federal court proceedings. I have a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, completed 17 weeks of specialized training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, and maintain ongoing certifications in tactical operations, firearms, and legal W-blanks and RGU procedures." I paused, meeting each person's gaze before continuing. "Last month, I led a team that apprehended 3 fugitives wanted for a series of bank robberies across 3 states. The week before that, I spent 14 hours on a protection detail for a witness in a major drug trafficking case. This evening, I came directly from an emergency court hearing regarding witness tampering in a case involving organized crime. I carry my firearm because I am a sworn law enforcement officer, and maintaining control of my weapon is part of my professional responsibility." The reactions around the table varied dramatically. The judge nodded with professional respect. The senator looked impressed, while his wife seemed fascinated. The business associates exchanged glances that suggested they were reevaluating their initial impressions of me. Richard stared at Valerie with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. But it was Charles Harrington's reaction that surprised me most. He began to laugh, a genuine hearty laugh that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Well, I will be damned," he said when he caught his breath. All this time, Eleanor has been telling her friends that her daughter-in-law's sister was struggling to make ends meet. "We even discussed setting up some kind of position for you in one of our companies as a favor to Valerie." He turned to his wife. "And it turns out she outranks the security team we pay 6 figures to protect our buildings." Eleanor did not share his amusement. "I do not understand why you would misrepresent your sister this way, Valerie. It is embarrassing." Valerie looked on the verge of tears. I thought you would not approve. You always talk about how important it is to have the right connections, the right background. Sonia's job is so different from our world." Different. Charles raised an eyebrow. "The woman carries a gun and hunts down criminals for a living. That is not different, that is impressive as hell." He raised his wine glass in my direction. "To Marshal Carson, apparently the only person at this table who tells the truth about what she does for a living." The toast was awkward but seemed genuine from Charles. Others at the table raised their glasses, though Eleanor did so with obvious reluctance. And Valerie looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Richard cleared his throat. "I had no idea, Valerie. Why would you hide this? Can we discuss this later?" Valerie pleaded, her voice tight. "I think now is the perfect time. I countered, the hurt still fresh. I would like to understand why my own sister is ashamed of my career." "I am not ashamed," Valerie protested, tears now visible in her eyes. Then explain the dishwashing story, Eleanor pressed, seeming to enjoy my sister's discomfort now that the deception had been exposed. The tension was broken by the butler announcing dessert, giving Valerie a momentary reprieve. As beautiful pastries were served, she excused herself, rushing from the table with a hand over her mouth as if she might be ill. Richard hesitated, then followed her. Charles turned to me once they had left. My son married a woman with interesting ideas about social standing. I run a business empire worth billions, but I started out pouring concrete on construction sites. Eleanor's father was a self-made man who built ships during the war. He nodded toward his wife, who pressed her lips together but did not contradict him. There is nothing shameful about honest work of any kind, he continued. But there is something deeply concerning about lying to family. The remainder of the dessert course passed in uncomfortable conversation about safer topics. The judge asked me several thoughtful questions about federal court procedures, showing genuine interest in my work. The senator's wife admitted she had always been fascinated by law enforcement and peppered me with questions about whether the job was as dangerous as depicted on television. Throughout these exchanges, I was aware of Eleanor's cold stare and the conspicuous absence of my sister and her husband. Part of me wanted to leave immediately to escape this house and never return. But another part needed answers, needed to understand how the sister I had protected and supported all our lives could betray me in this way. When Valerie and Richard finally returned, her eyes were red-rimmed and his expression was grim. The dinner was clearly winding down, with guests making polite noises about early morning commitments. As people began to move back to the living room for coffee, Valerie approached me. "Can we talk privately?" Her voice was barely audible. I nodded curtly and followed her to a small study off the main hallway. Richard started to come with us, but Valerie shook her head and he reluctantly rejoined the other guests. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to face my sister, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak first. Valerie stood with her back against the door, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had seen her in years. The confident socialite persona had cracked, revealing glimpses of the insecure younger sister I had grown up with. She twisted her diamond wedding ring, nervously avoiding my eyes. "I know you must hate me right now," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I do not hate you, Val. I just do not understand. Why would you tell them I wash dishes for a living? What possible reason could you have to lie about my career?" She moved to a leather armchair and sank into it, shoulders slumped. "It started small. When I first met the Harringtons, they asked about my family. I mentioned that Dad worked construction and Mom was a receptionist. Eleanor made this face just for a second, but I could tell she was judging them, judging me. So when they asked about you, I panicked. I had just heard Eleanor talking about how distasteful she found people who flaunted authority or carried weapons. She was criticizing the security team at some event, saying they were thuggish and intimidating. I felt my jaw tighten. "So you decided I would seem less thuggish if I washed dishes?" "No, I mean not exactly." Tears welled in her eyes. "I just said you worked at a restaurant. I never specifically said dishwasher. Eleanor assumed that part and I never corrected her." "That is still a lie, Valerie. And you had countless opportunities to correct it over the past year and a half." She wiped at her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "You do not understand the pressure, Sonia. The Harringtons have these expectations. Everything has to be perfect, the right schools, the right jobs, the right connections. When Richard and I first got serious, Charles took me aside and told me that the Harrington name meant something in Seattle, that it came with responsibilities. Eleanor was even more direct. She actually told me that if I embarrassed the family or proved to be unsuitable, they would cut Richard off financially. They have a trust fund for him that they control until he is 40. He has never lived without their money, Sonia. He would not know how." I paced the small study, trying to process what she was saying. "So you threw me under the bus to protect your lifestyle. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? After everything we have been through together." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know it was wrong. I know that. But it wasn't just about the money or the lifestyle. I love Richard. And I was terrified of losing him. His parents have so much influence over him. If they disapproved of me, of my family. My job is nothing to be ashamed of, I said firmly. I protect people. I uphold the law. I have put my life on the line to keep communities safe. How could you possibly think that would reflect badly on you? It is not that simple in their world. Valerie's voice took on a desperate quality. Eleanor has these rigid ideas about appropriate careers for women. In her circle, women run charities and support their husbands. They do not carry guns or chase criminals. I was afraid she would see you as dangerous or inappropriate. And that would make you look bad by association, I concluded bitterly. Yes. Number I do not know anymore. She buried her face in her hands. I got caught in this lie. And then it just kept growing. Eleanor started talking about finding you a better job. And I could not figure out how to tell the truth without making everything worse. I thought about all the times I had defended Valerie growing up. When kids teased her about her braces, I confronted them. When her first boyfriend broke up with her before prom, I spent my entire savings to buy her a dress that made her feel beautiful again. When she struggled with college applications, I stayed up all night helping her write essays. Do you remember when Tommy Phillips pushed you off the swing in 3rd grade? I asked suddenly. She looked up confused by the change in subject. What? Tommy Phillips. He pushed you off the swing and you broke your arm. Do you remember what I did? A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You punched him in the nose and got suspended for 3 days. And when Melissa Carter spread rumors about you in high school, you confronted her in the cafeteria and got both of us detention. And when that creep in your dorm would not leave you alone freshman year, you drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to scare him off. Her voice softened. You have always protected me. Because that is what family does, Valerie. We stand up for each other. We are proud of each other. We do not lie about each other to impress people who judge based on superficial things. She stood up and took a tentative step toward me. I am so sorry, Sonia. I was wrong. I got caught up in trying to fit into this world, and I lost sight of what really matters. I wanted to forgive her immediately, to hug her and tell her it was okay. But the hurt was still too fresh. The betrayal too deep. I need time to process this, Val. I love you, but right now I am angry and hurt. I understand, she whispered. What are you going to do now? I think I should leave. This dinner has been uncomfortable for everyone, and I have an early shift tomorrow. A knock at the door interrupted us. Richard entered, his expression serious. Everything okay in here? Neither of us answered directly. Valerie wiped her tears and attempted to compose herself. I was just telling Valerie that I should be going, I said, straightening my uniform jacket. I will walk you out, Richard offered, surprising me. We returned to the living room where I made brief, polite goodbyes to the remaining guests. The judge shook my hand firmly and said he hoped to see me in his courtroom sometime. Charles Harrington also shook my hand with a surprisingly warm smile. It has been enlightening meeting you properly, Marshal Carson. Perhaps next time we can hear more about your actual career rather than fictional ones. Eleanor remained seated, offering only a tight nod of acknowledgement. Valerie hung back, clearly uncertain whether to approach me for a goodbye. As Richard walked me to the door, he spoke quietly. I had no idea Valerie had misrepresented your career. For what it is worth, I think what you do is admirable. Thank you, I replied, not quite sure what else to say. He hesitated at the door. Valerie loves you very much. She talks about growing up with you, how you always protected her. I hope you can forgive her. I hope so too, I said honestly. But it may take some time. As I walked to my car, I heard the front door open again. Eleanor's voice carried clearly through the night air. Well, that was quite the evening. I suppose we should be grateful she at least wore a uniform and not some tactical gear with bulletproof vest to dinner. I froze my hand on my car door as Charles responded. That is enough, Eleanor. The woman serves her country while you plan parties. Perhaps a little perspective is in order. I did not wait to hear more, getting into my car and driving away from the mansion with its manicured lawns and carefully curated appearances. The night air felt cleaner somehow as I put distance between myself and the Harrington estate, though the ache in my chest remained. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. By the time I reached my modest apartment complex, it was nearly midnight. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my composure before heading inside. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Valerie and 2 text messages. "Please talk to me. I am so sorry. I know I messed up. Call me when you can." I silenced the phone and went inside, hanging my uniform carefully in the closet before taking a long, hot shower. As the water washed over me, I finally allowed myself to fully feel the emotions I had been controlling all evening: hurt, betrayal, anger, and a deep sense of disappointment. Sleep did not come easily that night. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations in my mind and thinking of all the things I should have said. By morning, I felt exhausted, but resolved to focus on work rather than family drama. My colleagues at the Marshal's office immediately noticed something was wrong. Jackson, my partner on most assignments, caught me staring blankly at a case file. "Rough night, Carson. You look like you have seen a ghost." I gave him a brief sanitized version of the dinner disaster. He listened without interrupting, then shook his head in disbelief. "Your sister told them you wash dishes. While you are out here putting your life on the line, that is messed up." "Tell me about it," I sighed. "I just do not understand how she could be ashamed of what I do." "Some people get caught up in appearances," he said wisely. "They forget what really matters." Throughout the day, my phone continued to buzz with messages from Valerie. I read them but did not respond, needing more time to sort through my feelings. My parents called that evening, having heard from Valerie that we had a disagreement. "What happened with you and your sister?" Mom asked. She called crying, saying she had made a terrible mistake. I explained the situation, trying to be fair despite my lingering anger. Mom was silent for a long moment after I finished. "I raised you girls to be proud of honest work," she finally said. "But I also raised you to forgive each other. Talk to her when you are ready, Sonia. Not before, but do not wait too long either." Dad was more direct. "What she did was wrong, no question. But she is still your sister. Family fights, family forgives. That is how it works." Their words stayed with me over the next few days as I went through the motions of my job while avoiding Valerie's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. By the weekend, I had dozens of missed calls, voicemails, and texts. I knew I would have to talk to her eventually, but I was not ready to forgive just yet. The following Tuesday, an unexpected development occurred at work. The director of our office called me into his office to inform me that I was being considered for promotion to a supervisory position. The Reynolds case, which had caused me to be late to the dinner, had impressed the right people with my handling of the witness protection protocols. "You have shown exceptional judgment and leadership," Carson, the director, said. "The promotion is not official yet, but I wanted you to know you are at the top of the list." The timing seemed almost cosmic, a professional validation coming just when my personal life felt so devalued. I left his office with my shoulders a little straighter, reminded that my work mattered regardless of what Eleanor Harrington or anyone else thought of it. That evening, as I was reviewing materials for the promotion assessment, there was a knock at my apartment door. Through the peephole, I was surprised to see not Valerie, but Richard Harrington standing in the hallway, looking distinctly uncomfortable in my decidedly middle-class building. I hesitated before opening the door. "Richard, this is unexpected." He shifted awkwardly in the hallway. "May I come in? I would like to talk to you about Valerie." Reluctantly, I stepped aside to let him enter. He looked around my apartment with curiosity rather than judgment, taking in the simple furnishings, the framed photos of my Marshal's graduation, and the bookshelves filled with criminal justice texts and novels. "Nice place," he said, sounding sincere, despite the obvious contrast to his own home. "What brings you here, Richard?" I asked, not in the mood for small talk. He sat on the edge of my couch when I gestured for him to do so. "Valerie is devastated. She has barely eaten or slept since Saturday night. She knows she made a terrible mistake." "Did she send you to plead her case?" Number. She has no idea I am here. He ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone I had always viewed as somewhat plastic. Look, I need you to understand something about the world Valerie entered when she married me. My parents, especially my mother, can be overwhelming. That does not excuse lying about who I am, I pointed out. No, it does not, he agreed quickly. What she did was wrong and I have told her so. But I understand why she did it. My mother has this way of making people feel inadequate, of imposing her values on everyone around her. Valerie was trying so hard to be what my parents wanted that she lost sight of who she really is, who her family is. I considered his words. And who are you in all this, Richard? You seem caught between your wife and your parents. He smiled ruefully. Perceptive. Yes, I've spent my entire life trying to balance my own desires with my parents' expectations. It is only recently, partly because of this situation, that I have started to question whether their values should be mine. Meaning I told my mother yesterday that her behavior was unacceptable. That I married Valerie not her family's social standing. And that I find your career admirable. And important. This surprised me. Richard had always seemed like the perfect son following exactly in his father's footsteps. How did she take that? About as well as you would expect, he grimaced. But my father backed me up surprisingly. He has been singing your praises since the dinner, telling his friends his daughter-in-law's sister is a real-life action hero. Despite everything, this made me smile slightly. Not exactly accurate, but better than dishwasher, I suppose. Richard leaned forward earnestly. Valerie made a mistake, a big one. But she loves you, Sonia. And she is truly sorry. Will you at least talk to her? I sighed, feeling my resolve weakening. I will think about it. That is all I ask. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. When you do talk to her, remember that her entire world right now is a place where appearances matter more than reality. She is learning, but it is a hard lesson. After Richard left, I sat for a long time thinking about what he had said. Was I being too hard on Valerie? Had I ever compromised my values to fit in somewhere? The answers were not as clear-cut as I would have liked. The next day at work, I received an email about the promotion confirming my selection for the assessment phase. The timing felt significant, a reminder that while others might misrepresent my career, its true value remained unchanged. I looked at my uniform hanging in the office closet and felt a renewed sense of pride in what it represented. That evening, I finally called Valerie. Sonia, her voice was scratchy as if she had been crying. Oh my God, thank you for calling. I am so sorry. I know, I said quietly. I got all 37 of your messages. Can we meet, please? I need to talk to you face to face. I took a deep breath. Coffee tomorrow morning. That cafe near the courthouse. 8:30. I will be there. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for giving me a chance. As I hung up, I felt a mixture of emotions: lingering hurt, cautious hope, and the steady certainty that whatever happened with Valerie, I knew who I was and what I stood for. The uniform in my closet was not just clothing, but a symbol of values I would never compromise, even for family. The cafe near the courthouse was my regular morning spot, a place where the baristas knew my order and fellow law enforcement officers often gathered before court appearances. I deliberately chose it for my meeting with Valerie, wanting to be on familiar ground. I arrived early and claimed a corner table, watching the door while sipping my black coffee. Valerie arrived precisely at 8:30, looking both nervous and exhausted. Her designer clothes were impeccable as always, but her face showed the strain of recent days. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, clutching an oversized handbag like a shield. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Do you want coffee? I asked, gesturing to the counter. Later, maybe. I am too nervous to drink anything right now. An awkward silence fell between us sisters, who had once shared everything, now struggling to find words. Finally, Valerie spoke. I do not even know where to begin apologizing. What I did was inexcusable. Why don't you start by telling me the truth? The whole truth this time. She nodded, taking a deep breath. When I met Richard, it was like a fairy tale. He was everything I had dreamed of, and his family represented this world I had always wanted to be part of. But from the beginning, Eleanor made it clear I was on probation, that I needed to prove I belonged. She would make these little comments about my background, my education, my friends. Nothing directly critical, just little digs that made me feel like I was always falling short. Charles was easier, more accepting, but Eleanor is the one who controls the social connections, the invitations, the standing in their community. When they asked about my family, I panicked. I mentioned Dad's construction work and Mom's receptionist job, and I saw that look on Eleanor's face. So, when it came to you, I could not bear another one of those looks. I knew how she felt about law enforcement from things she had said, so I just mentioned you worked at a restaurant. She assumed the rest, and I let her. Every time I thought about correcting the lie, it seemed like it would only make things worse. Months passed and the lie just grew. Richard had no idea until Saturday night. I never told him anything different about you. I considered her words, noting the genuine remorse in her eyes. That still does not explain why you would be ashamed of what I do. Our parents raised us to value honest work and service. I am not ashamed of you, Sonia. I never was. I am ashamed of myself, of how easily I abandoned our family's values to try to fit into Eleanor's world. Tears welled in her eyes. Watching you at that dinner, standing proud in your uniform, not backing down or apologizing for who you are, I realized how far I had strayed from the person I used to be. The person you and our parents raised me to be. For the first time since the dinner, I felt my anger begin to truly fade. What happens now, Val? I forgive you. We hug and everything goes back to normal. She shook her head. Nothing will be normal again, and that is good. This has changed me. Changed my marriage. Richard and I have had some very honest conversations about values and priorities. He stood up to his mother for the first time in his life. Richard came to see me, I admitted. He seems to care about you a great deal. He does. And he admires you, especially after you stood your ground at dinner. A small smile crossed her face. Charles called yesterday to invite you to their 4th of July party, specifically asking if you would come in uniform because some of his business associates want to meet you. Eleanor nearly had a stroke. Despite myself, I laughed. I bet she did. I have started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, Valerie continued. Not just writing checks or attending galas, but actually working shifts, helping women in crisis. It feels good to do something real, something that matters. That is great, Val, truly. She reached across the table hesitantly, placing her hand near mine. I know I broke your trust, and I know it will take time to rebuild. But I want to try if you will let me. I want to be a sister you can be proud of again. I looked at her hand, then slowly placed mine over it. I never stopped being proud of you, Val. I just stopped recognizing you for a while. I stopped recognizing myself too, she admitted quietly. We talked for another hour more openly than we had in years. She told me about the pressures of her new life, and I shared stories about my work that I had previously held back, thinking she would not be interested. As we were preparing to leave, I remembered something. I am being considered for a promotion, I told her. Supervisory position, more responsibility. Her face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. Sonia, that is amazing. Tell me everything. As we walked out of the cafe together, I felt the weight of hurt and betrayal beginning to lift. Our relationship would never be the same, but perhaps it could be something new, something more honest, and ultimately stronger. Over the following months, Valerie and I established a new tradition of sister dinners every other week, sometimes at my place, sometimes at restaurants, but never at the Harrington Mansion. She made a genuine effort to understand my work, even attending an awards ceremony where I received a commendation for the Reynolds case. My relationship with the Harringtons evolved in unexpected ways. Charles became something of a mentor, offering career advice from his business perspective and introducing me to contacts in federal security contracting who might be useful as I advanced in my career. Eleanor remained cool but civil, having apparently decided that a U.S. Marshal in the family was at least more exotic than embarrassing. Richard proved to be a better man than I had initially given him credit for supporting Valerie's new volunteer work, and even joining her occasionally. He confessed to me during a family gathering that the incident had caused him to reevaluate his own career choices and values. The 4th of July party at the Harrington estate was a turning point. I did attend in uniform at Charles's specific request. Eleanor had apparently spread the word that her daughter-in-law's sister was a federal agent, transforming what had been an embarrassment into a point of interest. I found myself surrounded by curious guests, asking thoughtful questions about my work. Valerie stayed by my side throughout the evening, proudly introducing me and correcting anyone who misunderstood my role. At one point, she overheard Eleanor referring to me as our federal agent connection, and gently but firmly clarified my actual title and responsibilities. Later that evening, as fireworks exploded over Puget Sound, Valerie and I stood away from the crowd, watching the colorful display. "Do you remember when we used to watch fireworks from the roof of our apartment building?" she asked nostalgically. "Dad would bring those cheap lawn chairs and Mom would make that horrible punch she thought was fancy," I laughed. "I miss those days sometimes," Valerie admitted. "Life was simpler." It was, I agreed, but there is something to be said for growing up, for finding out who you really are when tested. She looked at me thoughtfully. "I failed that test at first. But you learned from it. That is what matters in the end." As the grand finale of fireworks lit up the sky, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The pain of betrayal had transformed into a deeper understanding of my sister, myself, and the complex interplay of values, appearances, and authenticity. I had learned that standing firm in your truth sometimes means standing alone, but it also means standing tall. Valerie had learned that trying to be someone else to please others ultimately pleases no one, least of all yourself. Together, we had rediscovered the strength of our bond as sisters, not despite our differences, but because of our willingness to accept and respect them. The uniform I wore that night, and every day at work, represented more than just a job or a position. It represented a choice to serve, to protect, to uphold values larger than myself. No matter what others might think or say about that choice, its worth was not diminished. As we walked back to join the party, Valerie squeezed my hand. "I am so proud to be your sister, Sonia. Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," I promised. "Some bonds cannot be broken even when they are tested." And that perhaps was the most important lesson of all. True worth comes not from titles or appearances, but from living authentically and standing by those you love, even when the path is difficult. In the end, it is not how others see us that defines us, but how we see ourselves and the courage we find to live accordingly. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone misrepresented who you are? Or found yourself caught between fitting in and staying true to your values? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that your worth is never determined by others' perceptions, but by the truth you carry within.